Proper armor deflection. Slant your armor to decrease the angle of impact. Slanting your tank 0 to 30 degrees towards an enemy will decrease the angle of impact and improve the chance that the round will fail to penetrate or ricochet. Be aware this can increase your angle of impact to an enemy that is to the far right or to the far left of your position, which is why it is best to be used in tighter spaces and one-on-one combat. Incoming fire angle of 0 to 30 degrees will most likely bounce. As seen in the figure below, if the front plate of your tank is the bottom of the protractor, the angles for deflection are more easily understood. Red equals hit. Yellow is questionable. Blue is most likely a bounce shot. Always go for the blue. These graphics illustrate the above using tank models. This graphic illustrates flanking while distracted. The player has created a 40-degree angle on both his front and rear, giving him the greatest chance to deflect incoming fire. Covered next in armor deflection is basic statistics for Clan Wars heavy tanks. In future videos we will look at these tanks and their armor more in depth. The AMX-50B lower hull. 170mm frontal plate armor with 30mm of armor on the rear and sides. It is not advisable to attempt to deflect incoming rounds. For this tank in particular, it is best to avoid direct enemy contact. The E100 lower hull. 200mm frontal plate armor with 150mm of armor on the rear and 130mm on its sides. It is advisable to attempt to deflect incoming fire on all sides of this tank. The Moss lower hull. 200mm frontal plate armor with 160mm of armor on the rear and 185mm on its sides. It is advisable to attempt to deflect incoming fire on all sides of this tank. The IS-4 lower hull. 140mm of frontal plate armor, 100mm of armor on the rear, and 160mm on its side. It is advisable to attempt to deflect incoming rounds. For the IS series of tanks, their lower center of gravity with an overall less exposed frontal and lower plate, it is their turret armor that provides the majority of their armor. With 250mm for the front of the turret, 100mm for the rear, and 200mm for its sides. The IS-7 lower hull. 150mm frontal plate armor, 70mm of armor on the rear, and 150mm on its sides. It is advisable to attempt to deflect incoming rounds. As stated, the IS series turret is a major strength. For the IS-7 turret, with 240mm for the front of the turret, 94mm for the rear, and 185mm for its sides. The T-110 lower hull. Overall, 254mm frontal plate armor, 38mm of armor on the rear, and 76mm on its sides. It is not advisable to attempt to deflect incoming rounds. The frontal plate is already angled. See the graphic below. Such it looks like a boomerang. The T-30 lower hull. 102mm frontal plate armor, 51mm of armor on the rear, and 76mm on its sides. It is not advisable to attempt deflection of incoming rounds. The turret is 279mm in the front, 38mm of armor on the rear, and 195mm on its side. This tank is best in a hull down position.